When we look at the world, we see that the most powerful and prosperous countries today are mostly British, whether they are in the East or the West, thousands of miles apart, yet their language, culture and power structure are the same. America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain, all are developed and stable states, but the question is, where did the original inhabitants of these countries go? Were these lands British from the beginning, or were the actual population exterminated through some conspiracy, massacre, or exploitation? If not, then where are they today? Did they become a part of this growth and prosperity, or were they pushed out of this prosperity? On the other hand, if we look at Asia, Africa or South America, the original inhabitants are still there today, but suffering from misery, poverty and subjugation. So did independence really happen, or did the occupying forces just change their ways? It is a very important and striking fact that what is called freedom in the world was actually for a certain class and nation, while the original inhabitants were either exterminated, or made second-class citizens in their own land. Dear friends, Europe's small states were weak and chaotic until the 15th century, but when they found sea lanes and discovered the New World, they made themselves advanced by plundering, genocide, and stealing resources. When we look at the history of the major colonial powers of the world, there is a clear pattern that has remained the same for centuries. Capture any area, eliminate or severely weaken the original population. Own yourself by spending 100 to 200 years there. Get independence from your own motherland and form a nation-state. The same method was adopted in the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Latin America. First European countries: Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, France, Netherlands, Belgium, would occupy a new territory. During the occupation, they attacked the local population, massacred, and suppressed rebellions. Where necessary, local chieftains were bought off, or battles were fought between them, so that they themselves became weak. A legal occupation would then be declared, as was done in the United States, Australia, and Latin America. 1492. Columbus discovers America, and Spain establishes a colony there. 1600s. Britain gradually gained military control by setting up trading companies in India. 1770. Britain occupied Australia and enslaved the local people there. 1800s. The European occupation of African countries was complete and the resources there began to be sucked. When the occupation was complete, the process of completely exterminating or greatly weakening the original inhabitants would begin. Native populations were decimated through wars, massacres, disease, and forced migration. Those who survived were either enslaved or forced into extremely vulnerable situations. Native languages, religions, and cultures would have been erased, so that European culture could be fully implemented. United States. Red Indians, Native Americans, were killed, forcibly confined to certain areas, and European settlers settled on their lands. Australia. 90% of the Aboriginal population was killed or enslaved. Canada. Millions of Indigenous children were separated from their families and sent to boarding schools, where they were stripped of their language and culture. Latin America. Spain and Portugal enslaved the natives into forced labor, and most were killed by disease or massacre. When European settlers had completely occupied an area, and the native population had almost disappeared, they would claim to be the original inhabitants of that area. They would then start chanting for independence from their home country, such as Britain, France, or Spain. Interestingly, when they gained independence, the original indigenous people would already be in the minority, and the new country would be ruled by Europeans. 1776. America gained independence from Great Britain, but the government remained in the hands of Europeans, while the original Red Indians were isolated. 1867. Canada gained independence from Great Britain, but is still governed by people of European descent, while the natives are still in the minority. 1901. Australia gained independence, but it is still ruled by people of British descent, and the original Aboriginal people are still living as slaves. 1910. South Africa gained independence from Britain, but white rulers ruled and the original Africans remained enslaved. When European imperialism had finished plundering a country, and decided to liberate it, it would leave behind a system that would remain forever under the influence of the West. Western laws, Western banking systems, Western economic institutions, and Western education systems would have been imposed, so that these countries would never be fully independent. Local chieftains, feudal lords, and politicians were drafted as their agents, to protect the interests of the West. The result was that despite independence, these countries are still at the mercy of the Western powers. India. The British left behind a system in which the politics, economy, and judiciary are still under British influence. Africa. As the colonial powers left, they ceded power to local chieftains, but the original resources are still in the hands of Western companies. Arab world. After the Ottoman Empire, Great Britain and France installed their favorite monarchs there, who still follow the cues of the West. The United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand gained independence when they themselves became the majority population and the original inhabitants were gone. These countries are among the richest and most powerful countries in the world today, because they got real freedom. The subcontinent, Africa, and the Arab world received only nominal independence, as their resources, economies, and systems are still under Western control. The United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, and other international institutions are created only to maintain this system. As simple as this question may sound, in reality it is as complex and bitter. It is often claimed in the world that different nations have gained freedom, but if we analyze history objectively, we find that real freedom has come to certain nations, while the rest have been pushed into a new type of slavery. USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. These are countries that were apparently colonized, but became prosperous and powerful after independence. The main reason for this was that these countries were originally occupied by people of European descent, and when they gained independence, they were self-ruled. The original inhabitants, Red Indians, Aborigines, Maori tribes, were either killed, or exterminated through wars, disease, and forced migration. Natural resources, fertile lands, and geographical advantages all fell into the hands of people of European descent, who built their new empires. America, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand are among the most powerful and prosperous countries in the world today, because they inherited wealth and power. The economies of countries such as Belgium, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain were based directly on their colonial spoils. Belgium killed millions of Africans in the Congo and looted the wealth there, and today is a rich country. The Netherlands occupied Indonesia and made billions of dollars from the land there and is still prosperous today. Portugal and Spain conquered Latin America and are still considered prosperous in Europe today. All these countries prospered even after independence, because they strengthened their economy by enslaving others. On the other hand, there are countries and nations that remained backward and needy despite independence, because their resources were first taken away and then they were given a system that would keep them forever in slavery. Nauru was a small island that contained vast deposits of phosphate. After 1900, Great Britain, Australia and New Zealand mined the area and abandoned it. Today, Nauru has no water, no agriculture, and has to beg from the world. Britain ruled India for almost 200 years and left behind a system that is still dependent on the West. In 1700, India accounted for 25% of the world's economy, but in 1947, when the British looted it, it was only 2%. Even after independence, the subcontinent remained subject to British laws and Western economic policies. On their way, the British ignited the partition, the result of which is still present in the form of conflicts between Pakistan and India. Africa was the worst affected in the history of slavery. In the 17th and 18th centuries, millions of Africans were enslaved and sold to America and Europe. Britain, France, Belgium, and Portugal siphoned off Africa's resources and, when granted independence, installed leaders who would protect the West's interests. Even today, most African countries are trapped in the debt and economic torture of the Western powers. After the First World War, the Ottoman Empire was abolished and the Arab countries were divided into artificial borders. Britain and France installed their own monarchs in the Middle East, who still make decisions according to the interests of the West. Countries such as Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and Libya remained victims of the machinations of Western powers, so that they could never be stabilized. Institutions like the World Bank and the IMF were ostensibly created to help developing countries, but in reality they locked poor countries into perpetual debt. Countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are saddled with billions of dollars in debt and forced to pay interest every year. These loans never allow their economy to stabilize and protect the interests of Europe and America. The United Nations, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, and other institutions are ostensibly created to provide justice, but they are only used against weak countries. Governments involved in war crimes in Israel, the United States, and Europe are not prosecuted, but any smaller country is immediately punished. European colonial atrocities are not prosecuted, but African and Asian leaders are punished for war crimes. The arms and defense systems of most developing countries are under Western control, which prevents them from standing up to Western powers. Modern technology, space exploration, and industrial development are still monopolized by Western countries, and the rest of the world depends on them. America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand were depopulated, and whites became free and prosperous. The subcontinent, Africa, and the Arab world got freedom, but with such a system that they are still under the yoke of the West. Countries like Nauru were completely looted and deserted, and today they are forced to beg. True freedom was given to those who became powerful by enslaving others. Our independence is only on paper. In reality we are still under the economic, political, and defense control of the West. Are we really free? Or are still in slavery today? If you want us to cover a specific historical figure or event, let us know in the comments. We look forward to your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for the next part.